Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining me for this explainer. Today, we're taking a look at one of the most famously fascinating figures in the entire history of Western art, Vincent van Gogh. But we aren't just going to look at his paintings. We're going to really look at the man behind the canvas, peeling back the layers to separate the widespread myths from his actual, incredibly well-documented life journey. First, just let this staggering number sink in for a second. 2,100. That's roughly the number of artworks Van Gogh produced over his entire career. Now, what's truly mind-blowing here is that this massive catalog was created in just over a single decade. We're talking about roughly 860 oil paintings in that mix. And incredibly, the vast majority of those masterpieces, they were created in just the final 2 years of his life. I mean, it's a burst of creative output that's pretty much unparalleled in art history. So, because of that intense, almost manic burst of creativity, followed by his tragic early death, Van Gogh has basically become the poster child for what we call the tortured artist. You know the trope, right? It's that romanticized ideal of a creative genius whose profound work is totally linked to, and maybe even fueled by, their severe mental anguish. But, I gotta warn you right now, this two-dimensional myth, as popular as it is, actually hides a relentlessly searching human being. He was so much more complex than just a simple caricature of madness.
Section 1. Dear Theo, the letters, a brother's support.
To really get a handle on this complex guy, we have to introduce our anchor for this explainer, his younger brother Theo. Theo was an art dealer, and he essentially provided the unwavering financial and emotional support that literally made Vincent's work possible. Their lifelong friendship is recorded in hundreds of letters. The translator Arnold Pomerantz really hit the nail on the head when he said, "These letters add a fresh dimension to the understanding of Van Gogh's artistic achievement, an understanding granted to us by virtually no other painter." They have this incredible diary-like intimacy. Honestly, if Theo hadn't kept these letters, the profound inner workings of Vincent's mind, his theories, his daily struggles, they'd be entirely lost to history. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of that correspondence. Look at this. Over 600 letters from Vincent to Theo have survived, compared to just around 40 from Theo to Vincent. From 1872 all the way to 1890, Vincent relentlessly documented his changing color theories, his evolving techniques, and his super intense emotional states. He just poured the whole shebang out to his brother. Section 2. A search for purpose. A chaotic early path. You know, before he ever really picked up a paintbrush in a serious way, Vincent was kinda just adrift. Let's walk through this chaotic early timeline. In 1873, he's actually a successful young art dealer in London. But he gets depressed, gets transferred, and eventually gets fired. So, 1876 rolls around, and he takes a gig as an unpaid supply teacher in England. That doesn't stick either. By 1877, he tries to become a pastor just like his dad, but completely fails his theology entrance exams in Amsterdam. By 1879, he's working as a missionary in the Borinage, which was a rough, working-class coal mining district in Belgium. He was literally bouncing from job to job, facing dismissals and academic failures left and right, just desperately searching for a calling. The extreme contrast in his early life is absolutely striking. On one side, you have the successful dealer. At age 20, he's living happily in London, literally earning more money than his own father. But then, fast forward just a few years, and you have the dismissed missionary. Down in the Borinage, Vincent became so fervently religious that he gave up his comfortable bakery lodgings to a homeless person. He started sleeping on straw in a tiny hut just to be closer to his impoverished congregation. It got so intense that the church authorities were actually appalled by his extreme poverty and fired him for undermining the dignity of the priesthood. And this intense, totally uncompromising nature, it wasn't just reserved for his career, it completely bled into his personal life too. After moving back home, he fell head over heels in love with his recently widowed cousin, Key. She flat out rejected him, famously saying, "No, nay, never." But Vincent was incredibly stubborn. He actually traveled to her parents' house, and in this moment of sheer despair and passionate defiance, he held his left hand right in the flame of an oil lamp, declaring, "Let me see her for as long as I can keep my hand in the flame." It's a vivid, honestly, kind of shocking anecdote, but it perfectly demonstrates just how intense and relentless his personality was. Section 3. The dark early years. Committing to art. Let's move to and see how this builds into his art. Following Theo's advice, Vincent returns home in his late 20s and finally says, "Okay, I'm committing to oil painting." Now, this early phase is defined by a very specific, very stubborn aesthetic. He focused intensely on peasant character studies, painting local weavers and laborers. If you look at these early works, his palette is completely dominated by somber earth tones and heavy dark browns. In 1885, he produces what he considers his first major work, The Potato Eaters. But when he asks Theo to sell his paintings in Paris, Theo basically gives him a harsh reality check. Theo warns him, look, your dark, heavy work is completely out of step with the bright, light-focused Impressionist movement that's currently taking Paris by storm.
Well, Vincent naturally totally resisted formal instruction on how to change his style. In early 1886, while he was briefly studying at the Academy in Antwerp, he got into this legendary shouting match with his drawing instructor, Eugene Siebert. Siebert demanded that his students draw these classical, idealized figures. So when Vincent was told to draw the beautiful Venus de Milo, he instead drew a fleshy, limbless Flemish peasant woman. When Siebert forcefully corrected the drawing, Vincent just flew into a rage, shouting, "You clearly do not know what a young woman is like. God damn it. A woman must have hips, buttocks, a pelvis in which she can carry a baby." It's a hilarious story for sure, but it perfectly illustrates his totally unwavering commitment to depicting raw, unidealized reality.
So what does this all mean? It leaves us with a totally fascinating question. How did this incredibly stubborn painter, who was so dedicated to dark, somber peasants and muddy earth tones, eventually transform into the master of vibrant, swirling color that we all know today? Section 4. The Paris Transformation. The pivotal turning point. The answer to that question hits in March 1886, when Vincent moves to Paris to share an apartment with Theo. Boom, he is suddenly thrust right into the modern art world. He starts meeting the avant-garde, artists like Paul Gauguin, Émile Bernard, and Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. He discovers pointillism, painting with those tiny, distinct dots of color. He also starts obsessively collecting Japanese ukiyo-e woodblock prints. He even traces them to study their bold lines and flat colors in a practice known as Japanesery. This sudden, massive exposure to Paris's revolutionary art scene and Japanese aesthetics utterly shattered his somber, dark Dutch style. Now, what's really interesting about this is how aggressively he adopted a totally new set of tools. Those muddy browns? Gone. Replaced by striking, brilliant pigments. Carmine red, deep cobalt blue, and emerald green. He started studying color theory in earnest, really figuring out how to place complementary colors right next to each other to make them practically vibrate off the canvas. And as his colors brightened up, his subjects completely shifted too. He transitioned away from those dark, shadowy peasant cottages. Instead, he started painting vibrant floral still lifes, sun-drenched local landscapes, scenes around Montmartre, and these gorgeous sweeping views of the River Seine. Through all this intense experimentation in Paris, his signature bold post-impressionist style was finally coming together. Section 5. A tragic end. Decline and death. From Paris, he headed south to Arles, and this is where his style reached its absolute peak. But tragically, this period of immense artistic clarity was accompanied by a devastating decline in his overall well-being. He neglected his physical health, ate poorly, drank heavily, and it all culminated in a really rapid decline. First, there was the infamous confrontation with Paul Gauguin in Arles, which ended with Vincent severing part of his own left ear in a rage. Following this, he suffered severe psychotic episodes and voluntarily committed himself to a psychiatric hospital in Saint-Rémy. Finally, after moving to Auvers-sur-Oise to be closer to a doctor and his brother, his depression just deepened. On July 27, 1890, Vincent suffered a self-inflicted gunshot to the chest, dying from his injuries 2 days later. He was just 37 years old. So the crucial point we have to remember is this. During his actual lifetime, Vincent van Gogh was largely considered a madman and a failure. He never lived to see his own success. He achieved massive critical and commercial fame only in the decades after his suicide. And that brings us right back full circle to that misunderstood genius myth we started with at the very beginning of this explainer. Which leaves us with a pretty profound question to wrap things up. Would we view his brilliant, colorful masterpieces differently today if we didn't have his letters? Like if we didn't have that written record detailing his agonizing, decades-long search for purpose and his brother's absolutely unyielding support, would we just see pretty pictures? Or do we value them so deeply because we know the extraordinary human struggle it took to create them? Definitely something to think about next time you see a Starry Night. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.